Okay. Well, anyway, welcome everyone to Global Thoughts. I would like to welcome Dr. Harvey Charles, Professor of International Education at the University of Albany, SUNY in upstate New York. Dr. Charles, thank you very much for joining us, and I know you're a busy man, and we appreciate your time.
Sure. Happy to be here.
So I wanted to, you had mentioned this title, the Global Education Beyond the 2020 Portal. How did you come up with that title?
Yeah, well, Arundhati Roy, who is a novelist, an activist, an international public intellectual, let me put it that way, has published a book called Azadi, and I'm actually just making my way through it. And she actually refers to the pandemic as a portal. And essentially saying that we've left a world behind and we're making our way through this portal and to a new world that we can't quite fully grasp right now, but we will never return to the world that we have left behind. And I was really taken by that metaphor because it really resonated with me. And when I think about the calamities of 2020, it's not just the pandemic, it's the economic devastation. It is the rage and the anger around racism triggered by George Floyd's murder that we have seen around the world. And it's also the devastation brought about by climate change, manifested through record-breaking hurricanes and wildfires. And all of that, I think, has conspired to fit into this imagery of a portal. We are not returning to the pre-pandemic, pre-2020 world at all. And we're marching forward into a very new world. And, as international educators, I think, who all understand very keenly how much on the margins we sit on the various universities where we are based, yet how critical it is for our students to be engaged, deeply engaged in global learning. I really believe that this is an opportunity for us to harness these catastrophic events of 2020, which, by the way, are all global in dimension. All right, all of them are global. So this really is a teachable moment for the campuses where we are based, and an opportunity for us as administrators to say to our provosts and our presidents, global learning, global education really must become an organizing principle in terms of institutional priority in order to ensure that we don't fall short of preparing our students with the skills, with the knowledge and dispositions to negotiate this new world. And so that's why I kind of latched on to the title and wanted to make reference to the whole concept of a portal.
I think it's an appropriate terminology because we are passing into another era, a new perspective, so to speak, I think. And I think now more than ever, we need to have the global learning. We need to have more students go, not necessarily go abroad, but engage with the world and learn about it. I was just talking with you for people who've just come on. When I was in Cuba, I was resident director in Cuba. I had students say, "Look, hey, we came here to learn the culture, not the language." They really didn't see the difference when they really go hand in hand. They're integrated with each other.
Absolutely.
So it certainly is an issue, and I think over the next few months it's going to be very exciting to see where the field goes and what's going to happen. But I think it's going to be good to have these methodologies and certainly make it more inclusive. I think that's what I'm hearing, and I like because we want more people to get involved. Abroad has been trying to work with tribal colleges and HBCUs in trying to extend this. We're trying to do Coil for some of these programs. So I think that's the added value for me. That's one benefit, I guess, the silver lining of all of this is that you're allowing more access to more students to be able to take part in this. It shouldn't just be a small segment of the population that does international education or does education abroad.
Right.
So the next issue, you know, we had talked about this before, was the issue of identity. Can you maintain an identity, any local identity, while being a global citizen, or do you give something up? I've always told people, just because you become more global or international does not mean you become less American. Do you see any conflict there, or any issues with identities, global identity?
Well, Kwame Anthony Appiah, who was at Princeton for many years, and I think he's now at New York University, has written about cosmopolitanism. And I really have enjoyed reading his work on that topic. And he makes a statement which I find quite profound. It says, the boundary of your state is not the boundary of your moral concern. And I think that this speaks to the fact that as human beings sharing this one planet, we basically have an obligation to every other human being. And sometimes this sense of a universal obligation gets short-shrifted in the ways in which globalization tends to operate. Globalization, I would say, and capitalism. You find a kind of dog-eat-dog, you find a survival of the fittest kind of mentality, might is right kind of approach. And yet, we all share this one planet, and the actions of individuals have ramifications and implications for the rest of humanity. In fact, this is precisely why the United Nations has articulated the sustainable goals. Basically, in that document, the UN is saying to us, if we do not resolve these 17 goals, humanity will not survive. So our very survival as a species, the very survival of your children and your grandchildren and their progeny, if you will, is contingent on us right now, beginning today, finding ways to ensure that we live in ways that not only allow humanity to survive, but also to thrive. All right. And so, yes, we might be Americans, we might be New Yorkers, we might be Albanians for people who live in Albany like I do. But at the end of the day, those identities are merely a part of a much grander identity, that being a global identity. And in a way, we don't have a choice about this global identity. We don't get to choose that. By virtue of the fact that we are alive and we live here means that we have a global identity. And by virtue of the fact that we have a global identity, it means that we have a global responsibility. So those two concepts are not incompatible. And I have to acknowledge that there are people who hold very strong nationalist sentiments and believe that America first, and if you care about America, you can't care about people outside of America is to undermine American interests. And nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, in some ways, that ideology is not consistent with American history. The United States is a nation of immigrants. We have become strong and powerful, and we have become leaders in so many walks of life because people from all corners of the world have come here and have invested their time and their talents and their perspectives and insights to make us who we are. So we have to find ways to manage a local identity alongside a global identity.
I think I completely agree. I think we have to do that. I remember years ago, Ken Roth used to be executive director of Human Rights Watch, and he actually spoke at a NAFSA conference, and he said something that stuck with me. He said, for many people, human rights is an issue that happens far away in other countries, far away, thousands of miles away. It never happens here in the United States. People still view, many people, sadly, in this country, view human rights as an issue in another country, not here in the States. But we all know, yes, we do have issues of human rights violations here in this country.
Of
I think
course.
that is a key, and I think that I'm hoping eventually down the road that's could be part of our education as we raise future global citizens, that they can be aware of that. Something else I used to always give to my students, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, it just occurred to me, but Carlo Felice, I'll write his name, but he wrote an article called "On the Moral Obligation of Knowing of Overseas Atrocities."
Mhm.
And I like that because it is an obligation. We need to know it. We are on the same planet, and these are our fellow citizens that are happening. Um, something horrible has befallen them, and we need to be aware of them.
Mhm.
So I think, like you, Dr. Charles, I do view other program providers or study abroad programs as like, how are you inculcating your students or educating, edifying them with these type of values and these type of insights? It's making me much more sensitive in terms of that. Like I mentioned to you, I took part in the Leadership Institute at the University of Albany this summer, and it really opened my eyes. Some of the conversations there, and
Mhm.
I think I could use some improvement, certainly in terms of how I can make Abroady a little bit better, and how I can make myself better as a global citizen.
Mhm.
Um, but I think we've been speaking so much about students. What else can international educators do to really tighten up the concept of global citizenship?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I've been engaged in for at least 15 years is the whole notion of global learning and the internationalization of the curriculum. Put another way, the learning goals that we associate with education abroad needs to be shared with all students. Um, if we look at the statistics, and of course we're quite familiar with them in terms of study abroad participation, um, less than 5% of American students have a study abroad experience. On many campuses, it's viewed as an elite opportunity that can be accessed only by students with resources, and notwithstanding the many efforts that institutions roll out to make it more accessible, um, most students simply do not participate in study abroad. But the learning goals associated with study abroad are critical. In fact, they are indispensable for helping us to work successfully towards the realization of the sustainable goals and achieving a more sustainable planet. So how, in fact, do we prepare students outside of study abroad with the skills, the knowledge, and the dispositions to negotiate an increasingly interconnected and interdependent world? How do we ensure that students are able to acquire intercultural intercultural and cross-cultural skills? How do we ensure that students are able to engage in anti-racist education, for example? And I believe that using the curriculum as a guiding principle, we can actually achieve quite a bit. And so by articulating global learning outcomes for the courses we teach, for the majors that we offer, for the academic schools and colleges that exist, and even for universities as a whole, to the extent that we're able to articulate global learning outcomes, it means that we're baking into our very approach to learning guideposts that can ensure that students have multiple intentional and substantive engagement with global perspectives. Now, I'm speaking to a bunch of administrators, I assume, and you would say to me, well, I don't teach courses. How do I do this as a director of study abroad or something like that? And you do it by working with your chief international officer on the campus to influence the conversations that occur within the context of strategic planning. Every college and university does strategic planning, typically once every 5 years or so, and certainly when a new president or a new provost comes on board. Your role as a director of a study abroad is to raise the specter of global learning and the fact that it's an imperative that your institution engages with it in a strategic way. And if you can succeed in having global learning and the internationalization of the curriculum become an institutional strategic priority, then you have the opening that you want. But let's say that you're not able to do that. Or let's say that you just completed the institution-wide strategic planning process and curriculum internationalization was not on the agenda. In fact, the strategic plan made no mention of global education. And there are those that exist, even in 2020, believe it or not. What can you do? Well, you can try to be influential in getting the provost to launch a strategic planning process focused on international education. If that is your domain, then that is what you focus on. And in truth and in fact, on every campus that is serious about international education, there should be strategic planning focused on this work. And when this happens, you have the opening that you want to explore all dimensions of global learning, including the kinds of things that need to happen in the curriculum to ensure that students receive the kind of education they need to receive and are able to graduate as globally competent graduates. There is work that needs to be done in the majors, but there is also work that needs to be done in the general education curriculum. And I will tell you now, the idea that any one global course will address the need of any given student to become globally competent is foolish and is futile as well. You know, the general education curriculum ought to be a site for global learning, but don't take the easy way out. The silver bullet is really not the answer. To the extent that you're able to influence the conversations around the general education curriculum, do so in a way so that there can be strategic placement of academic experiences, not just a course focused on global issues, but what about modern languages? All right, can that be part of the set of graduation requirements? And this is salient, especially at a time when many institutions are moving away from having a language requirement. So there are a number of things that can be done, both within the curriculum and even in the co-curriculum, all right, to situate opportunities for global learning. I established an international house when I was at Northern Arizona University. And within 2 years, that became the hottest piece of real estate on the campus. I mean, the demand for students to live in the international house was far greater than any other residential facility. Why? Well, it's all about the programming. And I will tell you this, students want to be globally engaged. All right, in my 30-year experience, I have come to realize that the biggest obstacles to students engaging in global experiences is faculty. And it's a terrible thing to say, but it's a truth. And we as international educators have to be in the vanguard in changing this paradigm. And what I said earlier really has to be said again, which is we can use what has transpired during 2020 as a wedge, if you will, to pry open that door so that, you know, because the things that have happened are so obvious. You know, the economic devastation is global and it's obvious. The pandemic and the lives that have been lost, it's ubiquitous. It's all around the globe and it's obvious. All of these things are obvious. Use this as a basis to advocate for just busting this door wide open so that we can universalize global learning on our respective campuses. And keep in mind that education abroad, study abroad, internships abroad, research abroad, they're a critical piece of the pie. And I can't underscore that enough. But more can be done over and beyond education abroad, especially because most of our students are not involved in these experiences. So let's keep this in mind.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dr. Charles. I remember when I was teaching in a school in Boston a few years ago, well, it's more than a few years ago, but we had an International Education Week, and we kept the flags up on the ceiling, for a couple of weeks after that. And I heard one student say, "Look, International Education Week is over. Why do you guys still have the flags up?" I think it's that mentality. We need to get it's being global or international as a whole is a 365-day a year thing. It's not just 7 days a week or just 7 days out of the year. That's one thing we have to get out. One of the things I'm struggling with right now with one of our Coil courses is that a lot of American students, we always have them breakout sessions here on Zoom. And several students will say, "Look, hey, can you put me in the same group as my best friend or something like that?" And I say, no, because the point is you're meeting someone else, you're engaging someone else in a neutral territory. I think it's a wonderful opportunity. You don't have to fly all the way down to Quito to do this.
That's right.
But it's still some students there's still some vacillation there, and we just have to get it over. So that's why I think what you're saying really makes sense. It resonates. It's not just necessarily about getting people to go abroad, although that's the best option. How else can we do it so that they can maximize their time abroad, according some other international educators. So I think that's something that's important to do. And when you said about faculty, that resonated with me because years ago when I was teaching I'm working as a director of study abroad at a large university, I had a conversation with faculty, and this one faculty member got up and said, "Look, this is vacation abroad. Don't tell me study abroad is something academic. It's vacation abroad." And I had to list to him, no, it's much more than that. You can do these internships, you can have research, you can do all these type of programs that are much stronger. It's not just vacation abroad, but there are people who still think that way among the faculty. I think you're completely right. It's the faculty are key, but we should also make students be the key to really promoting study abroad as well, and to other students. Dr. Charles, I'm going to read you a question. Ramona has just sent, she is writing right here. She wrote, "I've been reading Lenitra M. Berger's Social Justice and International Education, just published by NAFSA. A great resource." Have you read that? I haven't read that yet.
No, I haven't read it as yet, but thankfully there is a lot of literature coming on the market,
Yeah.
and that has been also coming on the market that I think is making it easier for international educators to be more informed as they provide leadership on their respective campuses. So this is a great development. Let me also add that there are a number of training opportunities. I know that AIA has the SIO Academy for newly
Yes.
appointed SIOs, but NAFSA has training opportunities. ASCU has training opportunities. And of course, programs like mine at the University of Albany, where we offer a summer institute or even graduate degrees focused on international education. So absolutely, there are these opportunities that are becoming more available in addition to the literature that's being put on the market.
Well, I think that's spot on. I have to read that book myself, so I can't comment on that. I have been trying to prove myself by doing these certifications. I tried to do one. Cornell University offers an e-certification on diversity and inclusion, but unfortunately, the obstacle there is the price. It was like $3,000 for a 4-week course. I said, "Look, I can't do that." But I'm hoping more and more those type of things do appear so they can be a little more accessible to people. We will have to see, but again, going back to this other course I'm doing, this Coil course, we were having students compare Native American Indians in the States and then the Waorani tribe in Ecuador in terms of how they've been impacted by COVID. And it's been an eye-opening experience for some of the American students. They just had no idea the rampant effect. And I said, "See, look, it's just observation more than anything else. You need to engage. You don't learn about these things when you go abroad. You have to look around you before you go abroad and learn these type of things." So we'll have to see. So we talked about identity, and we talked about the portal. I'll ask you a tough question, I guess. So in 5 years, what will the landscape be like for international education?
Well, I would rather tell you what I would hope that the landscape would be like. And the first characteristic that I hope would exist would be a more broad-based acceptance of the imperative of global learning, on our campuses so that every institution has a chief international officer who is providing institution-wide leadership for this dimension of the academy. For much of the history of international education, and this is a very new field, as you may know, administrators have not really understood what form it should take on campuses. So in a number of instances, you find people being appointed to positions who have no background in international education. They may have been teaching courses on comparative education or teaching modern language courses, or they may have served as an ambassador, or they may have been born outside of the United States. And these are the criteria that a number of institutions have used in order to appoint people into the role of international education leadership. And this is deeply problematic because, as we would all agree, international education is a legitimate field that requires expertise in order to effectively lead. And so I would hope that in 5 years, colleges and universities understand the imperative for international education leadership and not only support the appointment of administrators who can provide leadership for this work, but commit to creating the infrastructure in place in order to make it possible to deliver in this regard. And when I talk about the infrastructure, I'm not just talking about an office of international programs or a center for international education, but I'm talking about staff who can provide leadership. I'm talking about a budget that would allow people to do real work. I'm talking about a situation where the chief international education officer doesn't have to be responsible for generating her own revenue to run the Office of International Programs. And I'm sure that many of you on this webinar today know exactly what I'm talking about. It is so on the margins that the administrator is responsible for the survival of his or her office. We don't ask that of the dean of the libraries. We certainly don't ask that for the vice president of facilities and administration. We don't ask that of the provost, right? But yet we ask that of administrators in international education. Not acceptable. So basically what I'm articulating is a scenario where international education is deeply institutionalized on college and university campuses, where it's par for the course, where the folks understand that when you come to this university, you will get a global experience. Part of that global experience will be having access to education abroad opportunities, but part of it would also involve being enrolled in courses where you are you have opportunities to engage with international perspectives. Part of it will be having international students on your class. And let me also add that the anti-racist agenda is very closely aligned with the international education agenda. So to the extent that you can be an advocate, maybe working with the chief diversity officer or working on your own to ensure that there is diversity in the programs that you manage, is really a responsibility on your shoulder. I think after 2020, it should no longer be acceptable to be sending 98 white students abroad and only 2 students of color. That is a problem. And in fact, that problem should suggest to you that it's a manifestation of structural racism. All right. So the onus is on you to find ways to correct that. All right. And you may not be able to do that on your own. It may require conversations with the chief diversity officer, but you may not have a chief diversity officer. So it may involve going to the provost or going to the president or speaking with your faculty advisory committee so that you have a group of faculty who are supporting of supportive of finding ways to change this paradigm, because at the end of the day, racism can only be eradicated when we dismantle the structures that support it. All right. And so not having adequate representation of students of color in your programs is a part of the structure of the institution that needs to be dismantled. And, you know, I believe that once you commit yourself to this task, you can be resourceful enough to find ways to make it happen. So, you know, those are some of the things I would want to see 5 years from now in colleges and universities. A curriculum that is infused with global perspectives, a commitment on the part of institutions to prepare students who are globally competent, a commitment to remove the structural, the structural challenges around race within the field of international education, and a universalizing of the imperative for international education, and the fact that it would touch all students and would engage most faculty in this important work.
I agree completely. Dr. Charles, I'm going to read you a question here we have from Joan Williams. She says, she writes, more and more I feel universities are becoming insular environments within increasingly insular nations with very insular information resources. Do you see the pandemic initially causing greater isolation effects for these institutions?
Well, to the extent that the pandemic has caused us to pivot to online education, yes, it has exacerbated the problem of insularity. And why is that so? Well, there are thousands of students in the United States who simply don't have access to the infrastructure required for online learning, right? And so, you know, that is a failure, not necessarily of colleges and universities, but of our broader society. Earlier in this conversation, you were talking about human rights issues and the fact that Americans tend to think that human rights challenges exist, you know, in far off places like China and India and Russia and the communist bloc, and they don't, it doesn't exist here. Well, access to education, not only from my perspective, but from the UN, is deemed a human right. And yet there are millions of students, millions of young people in the United States who do not have access to education, and not only at the higher education level, but K to 12. You know, so I think to the extent that we're able to think of this as a human right issue, should somehow motivate us, inspire us to advocate for policies that would make higher education less insular. And now, granted, no one was expecting a pandemic, all right? And so, you know, we can make the argument, well, higher education, higher education wasn't necessarily built to survive a pandemic. And yet, because of how we were able to pivot to online instruction, 25 years ago, think of it, we would not have been able to pull this off, all right? So in many ways, we are better off now in terms of how the academy is situated than at any time in our history. Higher education is now much more democratic. Higher education now serves a much broader swath of students than it has at any other time in American history or even global history. And if you look at the predictions for the growth of international higher education around mobility, we're expecting about 8 million students by 2025 to engage in international mobility. So, you know, I see a very hopeful future, and I just feel as though we have to recommit ourselves to the things that we know absolutely work and to the values that will continue to drive this field of international education.
Thank you, Joan, for your question. That was a good one. I think that is a challenge. What we're going to see in a few years, where we're going to be. And Joan, just thanks you. She said thank you for the hopeful perspective.
Sure.
So, well, right now I'm just going to do a shameful plug because this is a nice segue. Tomorrow we are hosting a debate between Dr. Michael Wolff and Dr. Douglas Proctor discussing this traditional study abroad versus the new pivot approach to international education. Because I think this is exactly where we're going. We have to change. We have to move in a new direction. As you say, Dr. Charles, we have to keep these core values that we have, but not only that, build upon them. And I think that's the issue is inclusivity. I'll tell you again, my big lesson really, for me, again, goes back to Cuba. It was a few years ago, and out of the 11 students I had, 7 were African American, and they all came with the idea, well, there's no racism in Cuba. You know, I don't believe that there's any place in the world where there's no racism. I hate to say that, but and they were stunned at the level at this idealism that they had that was finally tarnished. They said, no, this is not. I mean, really, some actually took it very, very hard. And so what I did then, and I had to, I don't know if you know Roberto Zurbano, but he's a Cuban essayist, and I can put his article up here in a minute. He got into a lot of trouble because he wrote down a few years ago, in 2013, he wrote an article that said, for many Cubans, the Cuban Revolution has not ended yet. The New York Times editor changed it to read, for many Afro-Cubans, the Cuban Revolution hasn't started yet. And that caused a furor, and he lost his job. He was ostracized and things like that. But anyway, I brought him in to speak to our students. And it got me thinking, we have to create this type of thing to allow people to look and view things differently. Because people say, well, in Cuba, there's no racism. But we had Americans who went there and said, yeah, there is racism here. It's just a different form. I think these are one of the values, these core elements that you speak of, that we have to inculcate into our students. They have to learn, they have to be able to observe and see things and not necessarily go to another country under any kind of preconception that they have or misconception. But so we'll have to see. But anyway, oops, we have someone just joining in. I would like to, the way we always do this with the Abroad is Global Thoughts is we have you speak for about 40 minutes or so, and then we open the floor to people who'd like to ask any questions. Joan already asked a question. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Charles?
Can you hear me okay? Harvey, good to see you, sir. It's been some time in person.
Hi, John. Good to see you as well.
Likewise. Yes. And Tom, I don't think we have had the pleasure to meet before, but I know you're doing some investigations into Coil yourself, so I'd be curious to hear your perspectives as well. Harvey, you've heard me ask variations on this question before, but I think particularly at this time, and I like this portal reference, I think we really are entering a new stage. You know, as you know, I work in the Coil virtual exchange realm and have been for about 10 years, including time at the SUNY Coil Center. And part of the messaging I've been trying to send now is more not just looking at it as a way to bridge the world to when study abroad is possible again, but how do we really start to look to Coil and virtual exchange as ways to really focus on those diversity and inclusion aspects and try to, I think, get people interested in study abroad. I think part of the challenge is getting people to realize that it has value to them on a personal, academic, as well as professional levels. It's not just the natural barriers we think about of busy schedules or costs or family commitments. I think a lot of it is just getting people to walk in that door to beginning to have international experiences. So I'm curious how you can see virtual exchange Coil playing I'll say a deeper role in this diversity and inclusion going forward.
Yeah, well, you know, Coil represents an opportunity to harness existing technology in order to amplify the commitment to campus internationalization. The thing with Coil is that to the extent that a faculty member chooses to leverage it for a course, it is not about making a decision as it is with study abroad. You know, you decide to participate in study abroad. You make a choice as to what country you go to. With Coil, when a faculty member says, I will I will coil, using it as a verb, one of my courses and partner with a colleague in Australia so that students in both classes can discuss the same topic, but from their own cultural perspective. Students don't have a choice, right? So I think really the challenge is to provide incentives to faculty to using this as a tool, as a mechanism to internationalize the courses that they teach. And this actually allows me to talk about a dimension of faculty engagement in internationalization that often gets ignored. And that is rewarding faculty for doing this work. You know, I know that the American Council on Education has put out a monograph on how tenure and promotion can be used as incentives to reward faculty for engagement in internationalizing teaching and research. But even that document concedes that the practice really isn't sufficiently widespread. We're talking about fewer than 25% of colleges and universities. And, you know, 25% is actually an exaggeration. I think it's less than 15%. But of course, rewarding faculty for this work is all part of the broader agenda around internationalization that still has not been embraced strategically by many colleges and universities around the United States. So we really do have our work cut out for us. Yes, I know, John, that I am kind of painting a much broader picture, but the broader picture has to be painted in order for us to make sense of COIL. All right, COIL happens within the context of a commitment to internationalization. And because of the advantages that it affords, meaning that it can be done with far fewer resources than some of the other initiatives that we recommend be done and we like to see happen, you know, hopefully it can make greater headway, easier headway in terms of its adoption. Sadly, the pandemic has made virtual learning, virtual teaching a lot easier. And I'm speaking in very broad terms, and this is not to discount the challenges that many faculty are still having with virtual education. But it has become ubiquitous overnight by virtue of the pandemic. And so to the extent that faculty now have a lot more familiarity in using this medium to teach, it also becomes a lot easier for us as international educators to inspire, to encourage faculty to consider COIL. Because, you know, you're basically using the same medium and it involves working with one or more faculty members in different institutions around the world to achieve pedagogical objectives around a course that faculty may be teaching. So I would really hope that 2020, when we look back, would be viewed as the year in which COIL really exploded around the world. You know, and I know that a number of institutions in other parts of the world are heavily into COIL. I interact with friends at Kansai University in Japan quite often. And I think that they're the leading Japanese university doing COIL. And they are using this as a way to basically spread the word about the importance and the imperative for internationalization. So it's not only a pedagogical device to advance global learning, but it's actually, in that instance, kind of the tip of the spear to really drive internationalization broadly writ.
Great, thank you, Harvey. I appreciate the comments. And
Sure.
I see we have another question in there. So rather than taking the whole floor for COIL and virtual exchange, I'll throw it to you, Tom, with Megan's question.
Okay,
Sure.
yeah, thanks. Yeah, Dr. Charles here. I'm going to read you Megan Hesserman's question. She is from the University of Minnesota, Duluth. She says, my university's program offers international student teaching opportunities programs in Ireland, Croatia, and Slovenia. Do you think that these locations are good matches for future educators? How much can we learn from their culture education systems? Or what other countries would be better matches for these programs?
You know, if you're talking about teacher education, I'm not sure that one country is better than the other. You know, I imagine that these college students in teacher education are going into K-12 classrooms and utilizing the skills that they've been taught as a way of gaining additional experience. So I don't have problems with the countries to which these students are going. However, if there is a demand or interest in going to other countries, and that interest may come from faculty in the teacher education program or students enrolled in the program, then I would hope that you and your colleagues would be open to identifying places in other parts of the world where students can have this experience. You know, the wonderful thing about students having an international teaching experience is that they're accomplishing two important projects at the same time. They are enhancing their teaching skills, which they would have had to do in the United States before they could graduate anyhow. But just as importantly, or even more importantly, they are immersed. They have an opportunity to be immersed in a different cultural context and are able to learn, gain insights into that culture that they otherwise would not have been able to if they remained in the United States. And of course, depending on where they go and depending on their commitment, they may even acquire linguistic skills as well. So that becomes a third benefit, a third advantage of doing teaching, you know, doing these kinds of, having these kinds of experiences outside of the United States. So I would say don't feel that the locations that you've identified are problematic. However, if you have a large African-American population at your institute in the teacher training program, some of them, not all of them, but some of them may be interested in going to destinations in the continent of Africa, going to destinations in Latin America or in the Caribbean, or in countries where you have a large population of Africans in the diaspora, all right? And so I think it would be smart to be sensitive to that sort of thing. The same would apply to Latinx students, and Native American students may want to go to countries where you have a large indigenous population. And, you know, I know that I had supported a global indigeneity project at Northern Arizona University, and the faculty involved there actually developed a study tour for students to go to New Zealand and Australia to meet and interact with Maori students in New Zealand and Aboriginal students in Australia. And it was an incredibly rich learning opportunity for them. So what I'm saying is look around, engage with the issue of student teaching abroad in a critical way to ensure that you can have a greater diversity of students in the program, feeling like this opportunity to be abroad is how should I say, sensitive to some of the interests and preferences that they may have.
Okay, well, thank you for your question, Megan. I think, John, you had another question, unless there's another question out there.
Allowing anybody else to take the floor, but they're not stepping forward. The other piece I had, which I think, Tom, again, feel free to comment yourself, is sort of how we can leverage these Coil virtual exchange ideas to tie in with the increasing reliance on short-term study abroad programs here in the U.S. Tom, I think you were calling it the academic vacation model that to some degree is becoming so prevalent. How can we leverage, we'll say, the powers that both of those can provide to create, we'll say, more fulsome experiences for our students, that last a full semester, even if they're only in country somewhere for a week or two?
I'll take the first crack at it. And I would say that for me, when we talk about study abroad, research abroad, internship abroad, the gold standard is immersion. All right. Now, if you participate in a faculty-led program for 1 week or 2 weeks, immersion is less of a factor because it's really hard to be immersed over such a short period of time. However, if you're able to leverage Coil, and let's say that you launched a Coil course in the spring semester, and you had it straddle the spring break, so that 3 weeks before spring break, the Coil aspect of this course, where students in both countries or in both classrooms get to see each other and interact with one another. So it starts then, and then on the other side of the spring break, you have another 3 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever. That kind of tries to approximate a kind of immersion, because it means that for the first 3 or 4 weeks, your students will get to engage with these students, get to know them a little bit. And then you have a study abroad, a faculty-led program, where you take them to Costa Rica and they spend a week actually interacting with these students. They may even live in their homes, all right? So there is that contact. And then they return to the home campus and the interaction continues again for another 3 to 4 weeks, all right? In my mind, that is about 7, 8, 9 weeks of exposure to students that would have never happened if you didn't have a Coil course, all right? And remember, the faculty-led experience might be optional, but the Coil experience isn't, right? So, this is, I think, a brilliant way of helping to get to that place of as much exposure or immersion as possible, even though it's kind of contrived.
I'll just add my two cents to that, John. I think with the Coil, what I like about it is, speaking from a provider's point of view, you at least allow the American students to interact with other students, their peers abroad, with the hope that maybe that will be enough of a nudge or encouragement for them to actually study abroad in that country where you're having the Coil program with. That's my hope, at least. Whether it actually happens or not, I don't know. But one of the things that Abroadia is going to pursue is facilitate ways where we can provide or assist professors in training and learning more about Coil, because I think there are a good number of professors out there who don't know that much about Coil. I think that, and they should have a training to understand what goes into it, the pedagogies, the methodologies, etc., just to see the value of it. Because I think we're speaking to the choir here. Everyone here, I think, is supportive, obviously, of Coil, but I still think there are some outliers out there who may not be, and I think they just need to be informed and better educated. I think once you get the faculty members on board, it's a go.
Thank you both. I agree, Tom. Getting the faculty members on board is a challenge, but I think this is possibly the most exciting avenue forward for study abroad and Coil as well, is how we can really combine the two into a really intense experience for our students. And I think it's definitely a place where, providers such as yourself can come in, and Harvey, people such as yourself at that senior perch who are able to say, look at infrastructural challenges that may make that difficult to pull off. What types of administrative things we need to change, what types of incentive structures, as you mentioned, which is very important, do we need to change to encourage our faculty to take those extra steps to move beyond the faculty-led study abroad programs that they may have done before and look to expand those in different ways.
Thanks, John. Dr. Charles, we have another message here from Joan. She says, or she writes, having worked on developing faculty-led short-term programming, I was impressed by the openness of faculty to consider recommendations from international faculty in their locations. These collaborations were most satisfying to all stakeholders. Thanks, Joan. Any other questions from anyone? Well, if not, Dr. Charles, do you have any final thoughts before we go?
Yes, absolutely. And I would conclude by saying that, as horrendous as 2020 has been, I really see this year and the challenges we've faced as an opportunity that international educators can really exploit to take international education to the next step on college and university campuses. If nothing else, the calamities of 2020 have demonstrated, maybe in ways that have never been as clear, how interconnected and interdependent we are as a world, and how much we need to collaborate in order to find answers to the grand global challenges that confront humanity. We have had, and we are actually witnessing right now, the creation of a vaccine in a record number of months to deal with a virus that we were not prepared to handle. The development and distribution of a vaccine has never, ever happened so quickly on the face of the earth. And what has led to this is the collaboration among research scientists and faculty around the world. So again, this one example flies in the face of those who proclaim proudly America first. There is no America first anymore. We have left that age behind. And yes, I'm preaching to the choir, but it doesn't hurt saying it over and over again. We've entered an era where we need to collaborate with one another to find the answers to the problems that confront us, and to really create the kind of life that we wish to have as humans on this planet. And to the extent that we are now witnessing this and understanding it, we have an opportunity to make the case in our respective campuses for this work. And I hope all of us would feel empowered to do this going forward.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Charles, for those words and for your time and for your insight. I really appreciate it. Before we go, I just want to let people know of our upcoming global thought sessions. We have tomorrow a very high-powered debate between Dr. Michael Wolff and Dr. Douglas Proctor, basically talking about the crossroads we are at in international education. Where should we go? Should we keep the traditional approach, or should we pivot to a new direction? That will be tomorrow at 2 p.m. You can check the Abroadia website for the registration. We have on the 19th, we have Shabana Basic-Rasik. She is a president and co-founder of the School of Leadership in Afghanistan. She's going to speak to us about the education of young Afghan girls in Afghanistan and the challenges that they've had to deal with. And then we have on the 20th, we have Dr. Christoph Van Mol is going to talk to us at 9 a.m. in the morning about student mobility and labor outcomes. And then our final event will be November 23rd at 2 p.m. Majo Aldana is a Guatemalan anthropologist and educator, and she'll be speaking to us about her challenges and her activities. So thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Charles. Again, thank you for your time, and I wish everyone a nice rest of the week. All right, take care.
Thanks. Bye. Pleasure. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.